So in this video, we're going to go through placement checklists. And in this video, we're going to cover 4 components as part of placement checklists. The first component is the fact that you can now define what is a default set associated to a placement checklist. So when you're making a placement, what is the default list of checklist items that are assigned to a placement? The next component is defining which checklist items are carried over in the event of an extension. So when you extend a placement, which checklist items appear against the placement. The next component is the ability from a company record to define a company-specific list of placement checklist items, which override the default set. And then the final part is the ability to add or delete checklist items from a placement record. So starting with the default set, so when in the checklist area against the placement entity, against each checklist item, you're going to have an option for default set. And that's basically to say when you're creating a placement, should that checklist item be included with that placement. That may or may not mean that you have all of these set as default to have them included, or it may be that there are certain checklist items which aren't appropriate to be included as part of a standard set of checklist items against a placement. So the idea is that for all the ones that are set to yes, they'll be part or they'll be included against a placement if a company hasn't got its own bespoke configuration, which we'll cover shortly. So that's the default set for the checklist item. The next point is carryover. So carryover is where you define whether the checklist item should also be carried over to the extension record. You decide that by against the checklist item selecting carryover, would that be yes or no? And if it's assigned as yes, obviously at the point when you're making the extension and it creates an extension record, that checklist item will also then be carried over and appear against the checklist of that extension placement. So that covers the administration of placement checklists from an admin perspective. What we'll now do is go into a company record to look at a company placement checklist. So within a company record, under the View More menu, you've got the option for placement checklists. There is also a company checklist, but that's a different checklist, more specifically about the checklist items that you cover as part of registering the company. Placement checklist is obviously the area that we're looking to configure here. And what we're doing as part of setting up a placement checklist against a company is we're basically creating override instructions that are going to override the default set that we assigned just a moment ago within the admin area. So this is to say that when you're making a placement against this company, what is the overriding checklist items that we want to show rather than the default set. And we can define this at a total level in terms of all locations, or it could be drilled down to be based on a country. So if there are specific checklist items that are relevant to, say, contract placements being made in Canada against this company, then you can define and tick those there. If there are specific things that you want to define as a checklist item, perhaps permanent placements being made in Germany, then you can obviously define those there and tick those there. And what that means is obviously when a permanent placement is then made against this company and the working address is based in Germany, then the basically the checklist items that then appear against that placement will be the ones that we have ticked here. So these obviously, as I say, override the default set that you defined within the administration area against checklists for permanent entity. But this is the company area for placement checklists. What we're now going to do is go into a placement and actually look at the checklists tab and see what's changed in that location. So within a placement on the checklist tab, what you'll see is obviously firstly the checklist items will appear as per what you've defined from the default sets when you run an original placement, and also what's been defined as per the carryover from the default sets based on the fact that we're in an extension. You might see different checklist items obviously in that scenario. Obviously you've got then the company override if you've set obviously checklist items specifically for a company in that scenario, but also what you have now is the option to add a checklist item as an addition as well. So if there is a scenario that's put to you which requires a checklist item to also then be added to the checklist, then you just hit add checklist item and you can select from the different checklists that are in your checklist area, and obviously select for those to be added to it. What you can also do is select checklist items, and provided they've not been edited anyway, you'll be able to delete that checklist item as well. So it's an editable, configurable area now in terms of adding and removing checklist items for placements. But that covers the placement checklist functionality that's been updated into Colleague 7.